Thank you, Giselle. Um, yeah, so it's really nice to see all of you today. We have some new faces and we have some um, regulars. All right, so today's study we're going to be going over Daniel 11, and this chapter is packed, really, really packed. We're going to be going through this just like we did Revelation 9. We're going to be going at it verse by verse, applying, if you were here for the study on William Miller's rules of Bible interpretation, we're going to be studying it that way. We're going to be taking all the verses, we're going to be seeing if it applies historically, if anything is spiritual, um, just making sure that it's um, just well rounded, that it's straight to the point. Um, if you have any questions or comments during the study, I'd encourage you to just hold on to those or write those down until the end. Because, like I said, this is just packed. So we're going to go ahead and get right into it. Also, I encourage you to have your Bibles ready because um, it'll just make understanding this easier that way. All right, and all right, so let's go ahead and get into it. So Daniel 11, beginning in verse 1, it says, "Also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him." So here Gabriel is speaking, and we know that because this is basically a continuation of chapter 10. And Gabriel is speaking, he's continuing to give interpretation of these crazy visions that Daniel has been receiving from God. So, verse 2 says, "And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia." So, first, let's break this down. What does the truth mean in this context here? And I'd encourage you to go to Daniel chapter 7, verse 16. So, Daniel chapter 7, verse 16 says, "I came near unto one of them that stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made me know the interpretation of the things." So, oh, and also, I also want to look at verse 19 if you drop down a little bit. So, and you'll just make sure it's in the side chat so y'all can read it. 7, verse 19. It reads, "Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, and his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet." So Daniel is seeing this otherworldly creature, and he wants to know the truth of it. Just like we read in 16, we can safely conclude that when they're asking for the truth, or when someone is showing the truth, at least in this book here, asking for the interpretation. So, with that, we can say that Daniel 11 is an interpretation. And Gabriel here is saying that he will show Daniel the truth or the interpretation. All right. So, and this goes hand in hand with Miller's rule number 7 and number 8, which if you want to go check those out, you can do that as well. So, according to Daniel chapter 10, verse 1, Cyrus was ruling. So the question is, who would come after Cyrus? So you have his son Cambyses, then you have Smerdis, and then you have Darius, the Persian, who gives the second decree according to Ezra 6, verse 14. And now this fourth king is his son Xerxes the Great, or we know him as Ahasuerus, which was Queen Esther's husband. So we're just going down the line, seeing how uh, these kings were set up, in the sense that how which one came after the other, basically. Uh, so, because of his riches, King Ahasuerus, he is richer than any of these kings. They call him um, Xerxes the Great for a reason. And he is the one that's able to go into Grecia and stir up all kinds of commotion. So this, the fourth, like it says in verse 2, shall be far richer than they all. This is referring to Xerxes the Great, or King Ahasuerus, right? Okay, so now let's go ahead and get into verse 3. It says, and a mighty king shall stand up, shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. 4. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. His kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside those. One thing that you will see as a recurring theme in this chapter is it just goes down history. And for the most part, it's very chronological. So this verse skips down 9 successors after Xerxes, and 6 minor rulers. So we're going down through history after Xerxes. And so after this, Alexander the Great starts to come on the scene as described in Daniel 8, verses 7 through 8. But after his death, his kingdom did not go to any of his successors or after any kind of order, right? Alexander the Great dies, and his 2 sons and his brother were killed. And instead, the Grecian Empire was split into 4 and was now under the control of 4 generals. And of course, like I just mentioned in Daniel 8, you have the goat with the 4 horns, and here we're getting the interpretation, the literal translation of that, right? This is Alexander the Great and how his kingdom was broken up. So that first horn that was on the he goat mentioned in Daniel um, was Alexander, king of Greece. He overthrew the kingdom of the Medes and Persians. If we remember in Daniel 2, the image, what comes after Medo Persia? It's Greece. Um, yeah, and you can, and there's other places that you find this prophecy. And like I said, here we're seeing the um, interpretation of that. Okay, and let me go through here. Okay, so it says in the verse, it would not be of his posterity. Again, his sons were killed, and then the next successor would have been his brother, but he was killed as well. So I'm gonna show you how this was broken up. I'm just gonna share this with you. Actually, I'm just gonna share my screen. Oops, wrong button. It will let me. There we go. Okay. And you let me know if you're able to see, showing you how this kingdom was split up. All right, so in the west, awesome. Okay, so in the west, you have the kingdom of Cassander. In the north, which is here in green, so this is the kingdom of the west. The kingdom of the north, you have Lysimachus. In the east, you have Seleucus. And in the south, you have Ptolemy. Right, so this is how Alexander's kingdom was split up after his death. Um, so I hope y'all were able to see that. Okay, let's see. So let's get back into it. Yeah, so Cassander had Macedonia and he had Greece. Lysimachus in the north had Thrace, which is Eastern Europe today. He had Asia Minor, which we call Western Asia. He had the Bosphorus and Hellespont. This is where Constantinople, or Istanbul is today. He had Thrace and Asia Minor, Eastern Europe, and Western Asia, which is now called Eurasia. So this is where Lysimachus is in the north. Seleucus was in the east. He had Persia, um, Babylon, and Syria, and Ptolemy had Egypt and the adjacent countries. All right, so this is how it was broken up, like it says toward the four winds of heaven. So verse 5 says, "And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him, and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion." So now we have, um, we're having like power struggles, I guess you could say. So Lysimachus, which we just mentioned, he was Lysimachus. He was in the north, and he conquers Cassander in the west. So even though this northern kingdom takes over the western kingdom, what happens with Seleucus, which was in the east, he conquers and Lysimachus, which was in the north. And now, because Seleucus, who was in the east, he now has 75% of Alexander's empire. He moves his headquarters in the north near Hellespont. And he moves here because all the Grecian culture, the money, the arts, everything is here in the north. So Seleucus now has the north and the west, and now he resides in the north. Let me see if I can do something here. I'm gonna open this up here just so it can be easier for you all to follow along. I'll say it again if you look in the side chat. What happened was Lysimachus, which was in the north or in the orange, takes over the kingdom of Cassander in the west. So now he has 50% of the original empire of Alexander's. And what happens is Seleucus in the east or in the yellow takes over both of those. And now he moves to Hellespont, which is where Istanbul is today. So now he has 75% of this kingdom here. So now he's in the north, but you still have the Ptolemies, which is in the south, right? Now we only have two key players in this verse. You have the king of the north, which is Seleucus, because he's literally in the north, and the king of the south, which is Ptolemy the First, Soter. So now you have two key players here. It says, "And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion." And we're going to see how this plays out. Verse 6 says, "And in the end of years they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times." So it's quite a bit there, but we're going to break this down to see what that means. So I'm going to put this here. I'm just going to sometimes put pictures in the side chat just to make it a little bit more visual. So what happened now is that as time goes by, in this verse you have Antiochus II Theos, who is the king of the north, so he has the northern realm. And then you have Ptolemy II Philadelphus, who is the king of the south. He's still ruling Egypt and the adjacent countries. So what happens is the king's daughter of the south her name is Bernice. So what happens? Um, Ptolemy, yeah. So Ptolemy Philadelphus, who's in the south, is the son of Ptolemy the First, and he has a daughter. And to make an agreement, he has his daughter from the south marry Antiochus Theos, who is ruling in the north. So Antiochus Theos, he's already married though, and he has a wife named Laodice. He puts her to the side, but what happens is that Bernice, she does not retain favor with that king of the north, and even though she does end up having a child with Antiochus Theos, but what happens is he brings his original wife Laodice back into the realm, and since Laodice was pretty much humiliated by her husband, she kills her husband, and she also kills Bernice and her son or her child that she had with Antiochus, and she also kills Bernice's relatives and any of the servants that were subservient to Bernice. So again, here you see, she shall not retain the power of the arm. Neither shall he stand, nor his arm. Talking about both Bernice and Antiochus, because they're both killed. She shall be given up, they that brought her, and he that begat her. So basically, this whole thing falls apart um, as a result. But verse 7 says, "But out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against him, and shall prevail." So, out of her roots. Here we're referring to a family tree. And what this is showing is that, I mean, even in history, what happened was her brother, Bernice's brother, comes up and is going to avenge his sister after what they did to her. His name is Ptolemy the Third, and he's from the uh, Ptolemaic kingdom of the south, right? So he comes into the kingdom of the north, like the verse says, he shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and and starts to deal with this kingdom. And what happens is, of course, he shall prevail, just like the verse says, right? Um, yes, so he comes in, defends his sister, he goes up against the king of the north, and this is what's referred to in history as the Third Syrian War, and this takes place between 246 and 241 BC. So prophecies fulfilled in this verse. Verse 8 says, "And shall also carry captives into Egypt their gods, with their princes and their precious vessels of gold and silver, vessels of silver and of gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north." So I'm going to read this excerpt. It says, "But hearing that a sedition was raised in Egypt, requiring his return home," talking about Ptolemy III, "he plundered the kingdom of Seleucus by taking 40,000 talents of silver and precious vessels, and 2,500 images of gods. Among these were the images which Cambyses had formerly taken from Egypt and carried into Persia. The Egyptians, being wholly given to idolatry, bestowed upon Ptolemy the title Euergetes, or the benefactor, as a compliment for restoring their captive gods after many years." All right. So yeah, so there was problems in Egypt, so Ptolemy had to go back, but he did not go back empty-handed. Verse 9, "So the king of the south shall come into his kingdom, and shall return into his own land." So uprising was beginning in Egypt, which demanded that Ptolemy return back to his own land, as the scripture prophesies. Otherwise, he would have conquered the whole of the Seleucid kingdom. He was pretty much on a roll, but he had to go back because there were problems back in his homeland. Um, and then, if he did conquer the whole Seleucid kingdom, there would be no king of the north, there would be no king of the south, because it would be an empire. And what's interesting is that he also outlived the Seleucid king by 4 or 5 years, thus fulfilling the words in verse 8 when it says, "And he shall continue more years than the king of the north," right? So, even down to that little detail, it is fulfilled. Verse 10, "But his sons shall be stirred up, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come, and overflow, and pass through, Then shall he return and be stirred up, even to his fortress. So, this verse here, when you're continuing with the history, this verse refers to the sons of the king of the north, I mean, south. So, we're talking about the Ptolemaic kingdom. After the South's great conquest that we just read, the northern realm wants to fight back, right? So Seleucus has two sons. You have Seleucus the Third, and you have Antiochus the Third Magnus. So these are two sons of the king in the north. Seleucus the Third was the first ruler, but he later died. And now Antiochus the Third, so this other son, is starting to make moves against the south after what they did to their kingdom. So, verse 11, and the king of the south shall be moved with choler, and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north. And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. So, now, as time goes by, you have Ptolemy the fourth, so he's king of the south now. And then you have Antiochus Magnus, which we just mentioned. He's king of the north now. And again, he's trying to go against the south. Um, so Ptolemy, he is warring against and he wins against the king of the north. And he takes Egypt, or Alexandria more specifically. So the army of Antiochus, according to Polybius, which is a historian, amounted to 62,000 footmen, 6,000 horsemen, and 102 elephants. This conflict, the Battle of Raphia, is what it's called in history. Antiochus was defeated with nearly 14,000 soldiers slain and 4,000 taken prisoner. His army was given into the hands of the king of the south, a fulfillment of prophecy. So, as the verse says, even though the king of the north comes with this um, great multitude, they still do not win this battle. All right, verse 12, it says, and when he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it. So he, referring to Ptolemy the Fourth, goes into Alexandria, Egypt, and kills 40 to 60,000 Jews because they refuse to allow him to do services in the sanctuary or in the temple, which only the high priest was able to do, and this weakened him. Right, so he just comes back from this great victory um, with the king of the north, and because of this, he goes into um, the sanctuary. He wants to do his like rituals, sacrifices, but they don't. But the Jews don't let him, and because of this, he engages in a short war with the Jews. But this just doesn't help him at all because I mean, once you just get done with a huge war, just to get engaged in another one, you've already exhausted so many resources. Verse 13, it says, for the king of the north shall return and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. King of the north here is Antiochus the Third. It says that he's going to return and he's going to come after certain years with a great army and great riches. And he did. He came strong. Antiochus Magnus, which was the king of the north, is a well to do and a very well known king during this time. When King Ptolemy in the south, the king of Egypt, passes away, he has a son named Ptolemy the Fifth, Epiphanes. These are the Ptolemies of the Ptolemaic kingdom in the south. So here we're just going through the kings one by one throughout history. Um, so the events predicted in this verse, it was supposed to occur after certain years. So the peace concluded between Ptolemy and Antiochus. It lasted only 14 years. So now we're going 14 years down the line. Meanwhile, Ptolemy, he died from intemperance and debauchery and was succeeded by his son, Ptolemy V. He was only 5 years old when he came to the throne. Um, Antiochus suppressed rebellion in his kingdom during the same time and reduced the eastern provinces to obedience. It was then at leisure for any enterprise when young Epiphanes came to the throne of Egypt. So, thinking this is too good an opportunity for enlarging his dominion to let slip, he raised an immense army, greater than the former, as the verse says, and he sets out against Egypt, expecting to have an easy victory over the infant king. So the king of the north, once again, is coming back, but he's coming back stronger. Verse 14, and in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. So Ptolemy Philopator passes away. He leaves his infant son. He's only like 4 or 5 years old when he comes to the throne. And Antiochus Magnus has the majority of Alexander's divided kingdom, right? In the north, he took over the west and the east, so he's there. And he says, if I can rule the south, I can rule the whole world, right? Because he only has 75% of the kingdom, not the whole empire. But it was against the law to rise up against an infant king. You weren't allowed to do that. So what happened was he and Philip of Macedon and others were trying to do a conspiracy against this king. But the robbers of the people come on the scene and they stop them in their tracks. And the robbers of thy people, so again, Gabriel is talking to Daniel, telling him the interpretation. The robbers of his people are Rome. So these are a small people coming out of Macedon. And this is around 202 to 200 BC when this is taking place, and all the way up to 198 BC. So in 202 BC, Rome is summoned. This is a small group of people coming out of the west, out of Macedon. And in 200, they stop Antiochus Magnus and keep Philip of Macedon in their tracks. And now they become the protectors of Egypt. They become the guardians of Egypt. So let me see here. Yes, okay. Um, right, okay. I think we got that down. So now let's drop down to verse 15. It says, so the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. So here in this verse, Antiochus Magnus is starting to overtake Egypt. So to this end, he dispatched a general named Scopas, a famous general of Aetolia, then in the service of the Egyptians, into his native country to raise reinforcements for the army. Having equipped an army, he marched into Palestine and Syria, and reduced all of Judea into subjection to the authority of Egypt. Thus the affairs were brought into a posture for the fulfillment of the verse before us. For Antiochus, desisting from his war with Attalus, which he was engaged in at the time, at the dictation of the Romans, took speedy steps for the recovery of Palestine and Syria from the hands of the Egyptians. So now there's a power struggle for a piece of land here. Scopas was sent to oppose him. So near the sources of the Jordan, the two armies met. Scopas was defeated. There he was closely besieged. Three of the ablest generals of Egypt, with their best forces, were sent to raise the siege, but without success. At length, Scopas, meeting in the gaunt and intangible specter of famine, a foe with whom he was unable to cope, was forced to surrender on the dishonorable terms of life only, whereupon he and his 10,000 men were suffered to depart stripped and naked. Here was the taking of the most fenced cities by the king of the north that we just read. For Sidon was, both in its situation and its defenses, one of the strongest cities of those times. Here was the failure of the arms of the south to withstand, and the failure also of the people which the king of the south had chosen, namely Scopas and his Aetolian forces. So history perfectly aligns with this verse. This verse prophesied that King of the North comes, they meet there near the Jordan, and the King of the South, they don't withstand. Neither is chosen people, neither there be any strength to withstand. All right. Verse 16. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land by which his hand shall be consumed. He that cometh against him. Let's see here. Let me get some notes here. Did you want to say something, Giselle? See, you're unmuted. Okay, I guess not. All right. So but he that cometh against him.
I wasn't up any cousin and them face or nothing. So I say had to be anymore. Pick up something anymore.
Right. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so we're trying to find out the identity of the him here in this verse. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will. Or we're trying to find out the identity of the he that cometh against him. So one thing also that you will find in a pattern in this chapter is that whenever it says according to his own will, we're getting a new player on the scene or someone's taking over, right? And then we'll prove this as we go out throughout the chapter. But for now, this is um, what that means. It's a transferring of power. So the he that's coming against him is Rome. Now Rome is taking us down to 65 BC. After all of this is going down, Rome is starting to conquer Syria in the north, and now Rome is the one that's controlling 75% of Alexander's kingdom. But it's only the guardian of Egypt, so it's not ruling Egypt. So that's why Rome is not a complete empire yet. Um, but now the king of the north, which was the Seleucids, they were overtaken by Rome. Rome is starting to come up in history. They're starting to rise up in power and they overtake the northern kingdom, but they're not an empire yet because they have not taken over Egypt, which is the last piece of Alexander's original empire. So remember the great image of Daniel 2. So history and prophecy, they're agreeing. The other prophecies in scripture in this book are agreeing because obviously we know that Rome overtakes Greece in the statues, in the great image, right? And with the beasts. So now we're seeing that happen here in real time in history and in the interpretation here that Gabriel is giving Daniel. Um, so it continues in the verse, it says, and he shall stand in the glorious land, which by which his hand shall be consumed. So I'm going to we're going to try to figure out what makes this or what is the glorious land or what even makes it glorious, right? So we're going to go to Isaiah chapter 60 verse 13. And I put it in the side chat so you can read along. It says, the glory of Lebanon shall come unto thee, the fir tree, the pine tree, and the box together, to beautify the place of my sanctuary, and I will make the place of my feet glorious. So in Isaiah 60, here we have a prophecy of Christ and the first advent that we're going through. Wherever the feet of Christ are on this earth is glorious. This also makes it a pinpoint location as um, as every king of the north, every king of the south, every king of the east, the west, it corresponds to this location, which is Jerusalem. And we're gonna find out here with history how that makes sense, right? So although Egypt could not withstand before Antiochus, the former king of the north, Antiochus could not stand before the Romans, who now came up against him. So no kingdoms were any longer able to resist the rising power of the Romans. Syria was conquered and added to the Roman Empire um, when Pompey, he was a general in BC 65, deprived Antiochus of his possessions and reduced Syria to a Roman province. The same power was also able to stand in the Holy Land, and it consumed it. Rome became connected with the people of God, or the Jews, by alliance, BC 162. Um, and Pompey demolished the walls of Jerusalem. It transferred several cities from the jurisdiction of Judea to that of Syria and imposed tribute on the Jews. Thus, for the first time, was Jerusalem placed by conquest in the hands of that power which was to hold the glorious land in its iron grasp till it utterly consumed it. So this happens in 63, 65 BC, and as the verse says towards the end, his by which his hand shall be consumed. This is like a solemn warning as to what's coming, because we know in 70 AD Jerusalem was totally destroyed, utterly consumed by the Romans. But here we're just looking at what's going on with the Romans, what they're doing, and eventually they overtook Judea. So, continuing on to verse 17, it says, He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her, but she shall not stand on his side, neither be for him. So he, Rome, we're still looking at Rome here, shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom and upright ones with him. So Egypt was all that remained of Alexander's original kingdom, and Rome wanted it. After the death of Ptolemy the 12th in 51 BC, he sets his daughter Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy Dionysius to rule conjointly, but they are both against each other. And since they, being quite young, their father allows the Romans to appoint a guardian over them before he died, and they appoint the general Pompey. So, being engaged in a war with Caesar, fleeing to Egypt, Pompey is murdered before he can even get to Egypt by orders from Ptolemy. So, um, Cleopatra's brother, Ptolemy, has um, Pompey killed before he even reaches Egypt, the one to whom he was supposed to be the guardian. So, what happens is Caesar, which was Julius Caesar, now becomes the guardian of Egypt. So, with her share of control in government is now stripped, Cleopatra goes to lengths to entice Julius for better favor, and she had all the effect upon him that she had desired. So, what happens is Cleopatra wants her power back after it was taken away, and she eventually gets it after enticing Julius Caesar. And what happens is they have a child together, and this is how he corrupted her because they had a child out of wedlock. But it says in the verse, "But she shall not stand on his side, neither be for him." So, what happened afterwards is that Caesar at length decreed that the brother and sister should occupy the throne jointly, according to the intent of the will of their father. So Pontanus, which was the chief minister of state, having been principally instrumental in expelling Cleopatra from the throne, feared the result of her restoration. So Cleopatra comes back in her power, but this minister of state is afraid of that. So he therefore began to excite jealousy and hostility against Caesar, which who gave her back her power, by insinuating among the populace that he designed eventually to give Cleopatra the sole power. So open sedition soon followed. Achillas, at the head of 20,000 men, advanced to drive Caesar from Alexandria or Egypt. So, skillfully disposing his small body of men in the streets and alleys of the city, Caesar found no difficulty in repelling the attack. The Egyptians undertook to destroy his fleet. He retorted by burning theirs. So, some of the burning vessels Being driven near the quay, several of the buildings of the city took fire, and the famous Alexandrian library, containing nearly 400,000 volumes, was destroyed. So there's just a big power struggle going on here. A lot of stuff is being destroyed within Alexandria. The war growing more threatening, Caesar sent into all neighboring countries for help. A large fleet came from Asia Minor to his assistance. Mithridates set out for Egypt with an army raised in Syria and Sicilia. So he's getting a whole bunch of help here. Antipater the Idumean joined him, so we get more help, with 3,000 Jews. The Jews who held the passes into Egypt permitted the army to pass on without interruption. And what's important here is that without this cooperation on their part, the whole plan would have failed. If the Jews have not have helped um, in getting these troops down to help Caesar, it would have fell apart. Um, the army of no this arrival of this army decided the contest. A decisive battle was fought near the Nile, resulting in a complete victory for Caesar. Ptolemy, attempting to escape, was drowned in the river. Alexandria and all of Egypt then submitted to the victor. Rome had now entered into and absorbed the whole of the original kingdom of Alexander. And again, interesting is that it says by the upright ones in the text are doubtless meant the Jews who gave him the assistance already mentioned. So without this, he would have failed. With it, he completely subdued Egypt to his power in BC 47. Daughter of women corrupting her, as the text says, the passion which Caesar had conceived for Cleopatra, by whom he had one son, is assigned by the historian as the sole reason of his undertaking so dangerous a campaign as the Egyptian War. This kept him much longer in Egypt than his affairs required, he spending whole nights in feasting and carousing with the dissolute queen. But, said the prophet, she shall not stand on his side, neither before him. Cleopatra afterward joined herself to Antony, Mark Antony, the enemy of Augustus Caesar, and exerted her whole power against Rome. So this fulfills that end of that verse. She shall not stand on his side, neither before him. She ends up um, going against Rome. Verse 18 and 19. But after this shall he turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many. But a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach he shall cause it to turn upon him. Then he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. So, as time goes by, we're still talking about Julius Caesar. War with Pharnaces, king of Cimmerian, Bosphorus, um, drew him away from Egypt, and he gained an absolute victory over them. So, after this conquest, Julius Caesar defeated the last remaining fragments of Pompey's party, Cato and Scipio in Africa, and Labienus and Verus in Spain. So he's just conquering all this land. And so returning to Rome, the fort of his own land, right? As the verse says, he's going back to Rome. He was made a perpetual dictator, and such other powers and honors were granted him as rendered him, in fact, absolute sovereign of the whole empire. But the prophet had said that he should stumble and fall. The language implies that his overthrow would be sudden and unexpected, like a person accidentally stumbling in his walk. And so this man who fought and won 500 battles, taken 1,000 cities, and slain 1,192,000 men, fell, not in the din of battle and the hour of strife, but when he thought his pathway was smooth and strewn with flowers, and when danger was supposed to be far away, for taking his seat in the Senate chamber upon his throne of gold, to receive at the hands of that body the title of king, the dagger of treachery suddenly struck him to the heart. Cassius and Brutus and other conspirators rushed upon him, and he fell, pierced with 23 wounds. Thus he suddenly stumbled and fell and was not found. And this all happened in BC 44. So now Julius Caesar is dead after all of this conquest, right? Verse 20, then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom, but within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. The next king to come up, or the next Caesar, is Augustus Caesar. And he is mentioned in Luke 2, verse 1, which says, and it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. He is the one that raised the taxes, right? And he is the reason that Joseph and Mary had to go to their birthland of Bethlehem. But it says, but if within a few days he shall be destroyed. Augustus Caesar dies at the age of 74 in 14 AD of natural causes. Like the verse says, neither in anger nor in battle. Again, the verse is being very specific here. And verse 21, and in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably, and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. The next Caesar to come up in Rome is Tiberius. Tiberius Caesar next appeared after Augustus Caesar on the Roman throne. He was raised to the consulate in his 28th year. It is recorded that as Augustus was about to nominate his successor, his wife Livia besought him to nominate Tiberius. And Tiberius isn't actually his son, it's actually Livia's son by a former husband. But the emperor said, your son is too vile to wear the purple of Rome. And the nomination was given to Agrippa. He was a very virtuous and much respected Roman citizen. But the prophecy had foreseen that a vile person should succeed Augustus. Agrippa died, and Augustus was again under the necessity of choosing a successor. Livia renewed her intercessions for Tiberius, and Augustus, weakened by age and sickness, was more easily flattered and finally consented to nominate as his colleague and successor that vile young man. But the citizens never gave him love, respect, and honor of the kingdom due to an upright and faithful sovereign. Again, the verse describes who's coming up after Augustus. It was um, his wife's son, and so he doesn't come in with a war, he doesn't come in violently, he's just put in peaceably, like the verse says. He obtains the kingdom by the flatteries of his wife. He was getting old and he needed to choose a successor, and it seemed that his wife's son was the only option. 22 it says, and with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. Tiberius' reign was a rocky one. Like we just read, nobody really liked this guy. And he eventually died a violent death. But what's importantly pointed out in this verse is the mention of Christ, the Prince of the Covenant. Um, you notice that it was Tiberius Caesar who allowed the crucifixion of the Son of God. And Luke 3:1 mentions, yes. Verse 23, and after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. So, having taken us down through the secular events of the empire to the end of the 70 weeks, the prophet in verse 23 takes us back to the time when the Romans became directly connected with the people of God by the Jewish League in BC 161, from which point we are then taken down in a direct line of events to the final triumph of the church and the setting up of God's everlasting kingdom. The Jews, being grievously oppressed by the Syrian kings, sent an embassy to Rome to solicit the aid of the Romans and to join themselves in a league of amity and confederacy with them. The Romans listened to the request of the Jews and granted them a decree. Basically, it said the decree of the Senate concerning a league of assistance and friendship with the nation of the Jews It shall not be lawful for any that are subject to the Romans to make war with the nation of the Jews, nor to assist those that do so, either by sending them corn, or ships, or money. And if any attack be made upon the Jews, the Romans shall assist them as far as they are able. And again, if any attack be made upon the Romans, the Jews shall assist them. And if the Jews have a mind to add to or to take from this league of assistance, that shall be done with the common consent of the Romans. And whatever addition shall thus be made, it shall be of force. This decree, says Josephus, was written by, I'm going to butcher this guy's name, Hippolymus, the son of John, and by Jason, the son of Eleazar, when Judas was high priest of the nation, and Simon his brother was general of the army. And this was the first league that the Romans made with the Jews, and was managed after this manner. At this time the Romans were a small people, and began to work deceitfully, or with cunning, as the word signifies, and from this point they arose by a steady and rapid ascent to the height of power which they afterward attained. Um, Let me see if I got this correct here. Yep, okay. So, the robbers of thy people, as we recently read, known as the Little Roman people, which became a great people. They protected and promised to protect the Jews, and they did for many, many years, until 63 BC, when Pompey made Jerusalem a province of Rome and started to mistreat the people of God. And again, we see this in this verse. Verse 24, he shall enter peaceably even upon the fattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey and spoil and riches. Yea, he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. So Rome rises in power, but the height of their popularity is actuated by their victory in the Battle of Actium, and we're going to get into that. This marks the end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire. And we read about this battle I guess we're going to read about this battle in 31 AD. So let me go down here. Make sure I have it all set here. There we go. Okay, so this is how the Battle of Actium goes down. This is when Rome starts to become empire. Remember, they have to have Egypt in order to be an empire because that was the last piece they were missing from Alexander's kingdom. So it happens in 31 BC, rather, that Octavian, who later becomes called Augustus Caesar, that we were just talking about, um, it wasn't until 31 BC that Rome started to rule the world because of the Battle of Actium between Octavian and Mark Antony and Cleopatra. Octavian won Egypt for Rome, and now Rome is ruling the whole world. They become an empire. Um, After Julius Caesar was murdered in 44 BC, just 13 years prior, Octavian, Mark Antony, and another person made who was called um, or they called a triumvirate. So there was like this council here, and this was the council where they came together to avenge the death of Julius Caesar. What happened was Mark Antony and Octavian were best friends. Mark Antony married Octavian's, who also becomes known as Augustus Caesar. He marries his sister, Octavia, but when Mark Antony was sent to Egypt, he fell in love with Cleopatra and he left his wife for Cleopatra. And Mark Antony became second over Egypt next to Cleopatra. And now there's war, specifically against Mark Antony, who's representing Egypt at this time. And so when Octavian wins the war, he becomes known as Augustus Caesar. And this is the Augustan age that we learn of in history. And now Rome rules the entire world. So from 31 BC all the way to 330. Um, so one thing that I want to point out here is that there is a prophecy within this verse. At the end of the verse, um, it says, "He shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time." What is a time in Bible prophecy? A time in Bible prophecy. I'm not going to go into all the details because we'll be here for another 2 hours. But um, if you've studied Bible prophecy before, you know that a time represents a literal year. And what's interesting is that from the time of this battle in 31 BC, if you add 360 years, right? Because a day for a year, there are 360 days in a year. So you add 360 years to 31 BC, you get to 330 AD. And what's interesting is that something happens in 338 AD, and we're going to read about that very soon. So let's continue on verse 25 and 26. And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. Yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. A great army. So this is the start of the time that the end of the previous verse is saying, the Battle of Actium. A great army. Cleopatra has a huge army out on the sea, and what happens is that these are um, the army that goes up against um, Caesar or Augustus. Um, but we obviously know that they lost. So Cleopatra left Mark Antony to be defeated, and he ended up committing suicide. And she also committed suicide as well. 27. And both of these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper. For yet the end shall be at the time appointed. Mark Antony and Caesar were formerly in alliance, yet under the garb of friendship they were both aspiring and intriguing for universal dominion. Their protestations of deference to and friendship for each other were the utterances of hypocrites. They spoke lies at one table, as it says, because even though they seemed to be friends, they were both conspiring against each other. Octavia, the wife of Antony, the sister of Caesar, declared to the people of Rome at the time Antony divorced her that she had consented to marry him solely with the hope that it would prove a pledge of union between Caesar and Antony. But that counsel did not prosper. The rupture came, and in the conflict that ensued, Caesar came off entirely victorious. It says at the end of the verse, the end shall be at the time appointed. This time appointed, as stated before, is 31 BC to 330 AD because, if I remember correctly, 330 AD begins the time of the Byzantine Empire. It's no longer the Roman Empire, and we're going to see how that happens. Verse 28. Then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. So there's two returnings coming here in this verse. So you have one where he returns to his own land, and then his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits, and then again he returns to his own land. So we're going to see what these two returns are. The first one is right after the Battle of Actium. After they have this complete victory over Egypt, they return to their own land. But the next great enterprise of the Romans, after the overthrow of Egypt, was the expedition against Judea and the capture and destruction of Jerusalem. The Holy Covenant is doubtless the covenant which God has maintained with his people under different forms in different ages of the world, that is, with all believers in him. The Jews rejected Christ, and according to the prophecy, that all who would not hear that prophet should be cut off, and they were destroyed out of their own land and scattered to every nation under heaven. And while Jews and Christians alike suffered under the oppressive hands of the Romans, it was doubtless in the reduction of Judea especially that the exploits mentioned in the text were here exhibited. Under Vespasian, the Romans invaded Judea. They took the cities of Galilee, Trorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum, where Christ had been rejected. Um, Yeah, they destroyed the inhabitants and left nothing but ruin and desolation. Titus besieged Jerusalem. He drew a trench around it, and according to the prediction of the Savior, a terrible famine ensued, the equal of which the world has, perhaps at no other time, witnessed. Thus, this power performed great exploits, and again he returned to his own land. Verse 29. At the time appointed he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. Constantine moves Rome's headquarters to Constantinople. But because of this move, it weakened Rome. In history, again, like we mentioned in 330, this marks the beginning of the Byzantine Empire, which was a divided kingdom, right? So um, at the time appointed, that's how this verse starts. At the time appointed, at the end um, of this time that we just read, it ends in 330, and this is when the Byzantine Empire is established. The prophetic time of verse 24, which has been previously mentioned, it closed in 330, at which time this power was to return and come again towards the south. And you notice how it says that he's coming towards the south. Up to now, Rome was an empire. It had control of the south. But like the time appointed in 330, the Byzantine Empire was divided. So they don't have control over every piece of Alexander's original kingdom. That's why now they're able to go against the king of the south, because now there is a king of the south, because they don't rule all of Alexander's original empire. So that's just something to keep in mind. Um, so in 330, at which this time this power was to return and to come again toward the south, but not as on the former occasion when it went to Egypt, nor as the latter when it went into Judea. Those were expeditions which resulted in conquest and glory. This one led to demoralization and ruin. The removal of the seat of empire to Constantinople was the signal for the downfall of the empire. Rome then lost its prestige. The Western division was exposed to the incursions of foreign enemies. On the death of Constantine, the Roman Empire was divided into three parts between his three sons, Constantius, Constantine II, and Constans. Constantine II and Constans quarreled, and Constans, being victor, gained supremacy of the whole West. He was soon slain by one of his commanders, who in turn was shortly after defeated by the surviving emperor, and in despair ended his own days. That was in AD 353. The barbarians, of the north now began their incursions and extended their conquests till the imperial power of the west expired in AD 476. This was indeed different from the two former movements brought to view in the prophecy, and to this the fatal step of removing the seat of the empire from Rome to Constantinople directly led. So, what happened was this also goes in um, direct conjunction with the statue or the image in Daniel 2. Um, you get to the 10 toes. What happened was, um, along with the Byzantine Empire being divided into the west and the east, um, after the barbarians of the north came in and started sacking Rome, now they're having like um, in the western part of Europe, they have 10 divisions, the 10 toes of these different realms. And all of this is going on. And that's why it says that even though he's returning to come towards the south, he doesn't win. It's not like the former or as the latter, where he wins. He loses this battle. And it's because Constantine moved his headquarters to Constantinople. He's moving all of his armies, all of his intelligence, whatever. This is a huge mistake, and there is no longer a Roman Empire. And now you have a king of the south again. Says verse 30, for the ships of Shittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved, and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do, he shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. Okay, so I'm going to read an excerpt from a historian here, Dr. A. Clark, on, and let me see here. And this is a commentary on Isaiah 23, verse 1, because we're trying to figure out who is Chittim, right? Who are the ships of Chittim? So this quote here says, "From the land of Chittim it is revealed to them." So this is on, like I said, Isaiah 23, 1. I should probably pull that up so we can see what that actually says. Isaiah chapter 23, verse 1, I believe. Yes, it says, "The burden of Tyre, howl ye ships of Tarshish, for it is laid waste, that there is no house, no entering in. From the land of Chittim it is revealed to them." We're trying to find out where this is. It says, "From the land of Shittim it is revealed to them." The news of the destruction of Tyre by Nebuchadnezzar is said to be brought to them from Chittim, the islands and the coasts of the Mediterranean. For the Tyrians, says Jerome on verse 6, when they saw they had no other means of escape, fled in their ships and took refuge in Carthage and in the islands of the Ionian and Aegean seas. So also Jacri, another historian on the same place. Um, Kitto gives the same locality to Chittim, namely the coast and islands of the Mediterranean, and the mind is carried by the testimony of Jerome to a definite and celebrated city situated in that land, that is, Carthage. So now we're pinpointing where Chittim is, where this land of Chittim, this ancient land is, and it is what we know today as Carthage. There were indeed ships from Shittim coming against this weakened Roman Empire by the Vandals. So the Vandals is one of these divisions that are going up against the Roman Empire, and they come from Shittim or Carthage, as we just established. And it says in the verse, he would be grieved and return. Rome was trying to get rid of these Genseric attacks twice, but they couldn't, and it was forced to submit. And it also says indignation against the covenant. That is the Holy Scriptures, the book of the covenant. A resolution of this nature was accomplished in Rome. The Heruli, the Goths, and the Vandals, who conquered Rome, embraced the Arian faith, and they became enemies of the Catholic Church. So during this time, you have to realize that Catholicism is starting to become, or is, the religion of the Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire at this point. And what happened was these three realms, the peoples, Heruli, the Goths, and the Vandals, um, their religion is now against the Catholic faith. I remember the three horns in Daniel 7. Um, it was especially for the purpose of exterminating this heresy that Justinian decreed the Pope to be the head of the church and the corrector of heretics. The Bible soon came to be regarded as a dangerous book that should not be read by the common people, but all questions in dispute were to be submitted to the Pope. Thus was indignity heaped upon God's word, and the emperors of Rome, the eastern division of which still continued, had intelligence or connived with the Church of Rome, which had forsaken the covenant, right? And constituted the great apostasy for the purpose of putting down heresy. The man of sin was raised to his presumptuous throne by the defeat of the Arian Goths, who then held possession of Rome in AD 538. Again, um, this verse says it that this that he would have indignation against the Holy Covenant, the Bible. So shall he do, he shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant. So now the Bible is starting to be attacked. Um, and if you remember, in the beast in Daniel 7, there was these three horns that came up, but they were uprooted. And those three horns was the Heruli, the Goths, and the Vandals, because their religion was against the Catholic faith. But now the Roman um, Catholic, I guess you could say, are against this and want to uproot it. So, verse 31, it says, "And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate." So, we're going in chronological order. What happens is in France under King Clovis, who was known as the son of the Catholic Church, is the first of these seven pagan nations. Because remember, you had 10, but three were plucked up because they were against the Catholic Church. Um, is the so France is the first of these seven pagan nations to give homage to the Catholic Church, and by 508 AD, he convinces the other six pagan nations to also give him homage. But you have these three Aryan nations that did not give homage, so the kings have to be plucked up. Then we know in 538, 533, Justinian makes a decree for the papacy, for the Bishop of Rome in the West to be the head of all the churches, to be the head of all Christianity. So let's take a look here at this word or at this excerpt in this verse. It says, "And shall take away the daily," in verse 31, "and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate." The word sacrifice in this verse is a supplied word, and that's why it's italicized in the Bible. We've been told in early writings, page 74, that it doesn't belong in the text. The daily desolation was known as paganism. So, what happens is that the word here rendered daily occurs in the Old Testament, according to the Hebrew Concordance, 102 times, and is in a great majority of instances rendered continue or continually. The idea of sacrifice does not attach to the word at all, nor is there any word in the text which signifies sacrifice. That is a holy supply that is supplied. It's a supplied word. The translators putting in that word which their understanding of the text seemed to demand, but they evidently entertained an erroneous view. The sacrifices of the Jews not being referred to at all in this text or at any time it appears in the Bible. It appears therefore more in accordance with both the construction and the context to suppose that the word daily refers to a desolating power, like the transgression of desolation with which it is connected. Then we have two desolating powers, which for a long period oppress or desolate the church. Literally, the text may be rendered in Daniel 8, "How long the vision concerning the continuance and the transgression of desolation." The word desolation being related to both continuance and transgression, as though it were expressed in full, like, for example, thus continuance of desolation and the transgression of desolation. So you have this word daily sacrifice. Sacrifice does not belong in this text because anytime you read the context of it, in any other time it's mentioned in the Bible, sacrifice has nothing to do with it. They were just, what happened was this idea of a daily sacrifice was a belief that they held at the time when they were translating the Bible, and so they thought, well, maybe this belongs in here. But when looking at the word and understanding what it means, what its context is in the original language, it has nothing to do with sacrifice. It is just a continual desolating power, the um, which paganism was. And now we know here that paganism is now being replaced by papalism. Now, the papacy, a new type of religion, is coming on the scene where the church now is ruling and controlling the state. It's over the affairs of the government. It's dictating to the people how they can and cannot live and how they must abide by the church's rule. And so now the papacy is being called here the abomination that maketh desolate. This is the title for the papacy here, and this is from 538 AD to 1798. Let's continue on, verse 32. "And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries, but the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits." Those that forsake the covenant. The Holy Scriptures, which is what the covenant is, and think more of the decrees of popes and the decisions of councils more than they do of the word of God. This perfectly describes the papacy. "These shall he," the pope, "corrupt by flatteries." that is, lead them on in their partisan zeal for himself by the bestowment of wealth, position, and honors. All of that you could get from the papacy if you basically join their side. At the same time, a people shall exist who know their God, and these shall be strong and do exploits. These were those who kept pure religion alive in the earth during the dark ages of papal tyranny, and performed marvelous acts of self sacrifice and religious heroism in behalf of their faith. Prominent among these stand the Waldenses, the Albigenses, and the Huguenots. So, even though all of this is going on, there's still a people that truly know God and are teaching others, even though um, this power here is against the Holy Covenant. Verse 33, and they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword, and by flame, by captivity, and by spoil many days. We're here in this timeline in the time of the Great Reformation. You had Martin Luther in Germany, you had John Calvin in France, you have Zwingli in Switzerland, you have John Knox in Scotland, you have the Lollards, who were the followers of Wycliffe, who started to translate the Bible into English. You have them in England. So here, the Great Reformation is spreading all over Europe, which was the land of the time where the light had been put out because of the papacy. This time was known as the Dark Ages. So in verse 33, we are in the time of the Reformation. Verse 34, when they shall fall, they shall be holpen with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. So now you get to verse 34 here. Um, so let me see here. So now these people are being helped. These people that are, dying by the sword, by the flame. We have the martyrs, but they're helped in this time. Um, so the little help mentioned here in this verse is linked to the New World, later the United States. This is in conjunction with Revelation. The woman flees into the wilderness, right? Revelation 12. Um, but here we're going to go through history and see how that even happened, right? So we are in, and this time in the verse, we are in what is called the second woe, right? So if you remember our study on Revelation 9, Turkey was a big power during this time. They took over Constantinople, and this is between July 27th, 1449. This goes all the way till August 11th, 1840, right? So what happens here under this second woe in Revelation? What happens is that in 1453, just 4 years later, Turkey invades Constantinople, which is a Roman Greek empire. This is where Justinian ruled. This is where Constantine had moved the Roman headquarters to. Now Turkey overtakes this territory. Um, Let me see. So we know what happens is that because they rule this, what happened was Columbus, when he was discovering the New World, what happened is that he didn't go the regular route to India. And the reason why he didn't go the regular route to India was because Turkey ruled that route and they were not on good terms at the time. So he had to go west. He had to go the other way. And they discovered what we now know as America, right? Because of Christopher Columbus's discovery, Europe had never heard of it, and now what we know as the Pilgrims, so now they know of this land, and they're able to migrate to this new world, and they're away from the persecuting power of the papacy. Um, so that's a fact here, and this is just beautiful history. So in verse 34, we're in the year 1620, which is um, when the Pilgrims arrive to America, fleeing the persecution in England. Um, but what happens is that when they are being helped, the cause, like the Reformation, is starting to become popular in this time. Many were to cleave unto them with flatteries, as the verse says, or embrace the cause, but um, they're cleaving unto them with flatteries. It's from unworthy motives. Um, From insincere, hollow hearted motives, they speak smooth and friendly words through a policy of self interest. So they're trying to persuade these pilgrims to not migrate to America. And this is what the verse is saying here because the cause is starting to become popular, but um, Satan's always there to corrupt it. And they were trying to keep them in Europe and to not migrate here to the New World. But of course, that did not go well, and they did. Verse 35. And some of them of understanding shall fall to try them, to purge and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. So even though it's restrained a little bit, the spirit of persecution was not totally destroyed. It broke out whenever there was opportunity, even after the pilgrims left. So, what is this time of the end? It's not the end of the world. This is the time of the papal end, of their civil power. This now comes to an end, and this is known as the year 1798, for those of you who know Bible prophecy. We know that in 1798, under France, General Berthier marched right into Rome, right into the Vatican, and took the Pope captive on February 10th, 1798. So France has been existing from verse 31 all the way to verse 35, because remember, France used to be the son of the firstborn of the Catholic Church, as they used to call him. And all throughout this time, they were like the right hand man of the Pope. And up to this time, in verse 35, they're now taking him captive. So now we're going into another couple of verses, verse 36 and 37. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that that is determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. So here's something to note here. The king here introduced cannot denote the same power which was last noticed, namely the papal power, for the specifications will not hold good if applied to that power. So take a declaration in the next verse, nor regard any God. This has never been true of the papacy. God and Christ, though often placed in a false position, have never been professedly set aside and rejected from that system of religion. So the papacy cannot be this king that is doing according to his will, right, and exalt himself and magnify. So even though we know that the Pope, they're always putting God and Christ under a false light, they have never said to have totally rejected God or Christ. They're, I mean, under the garb of Christianity, um, they're still claiming to worship God. They claim to worship Christ. They're not putting him aside. And this is not referring to King Louis, as some say as well. This is referring to the kingdom of atheistic France. Now, when you see this word according to his will, if you go to Daniel chapter 8, verses 1 through 4, when Medo Persia is taking power away from Babylon, it tells us in verse 4 that Medo Persia, this kingdom, was doing according to its will. When you get to Daniel chapter 11, verse 3 and 4, it talks about Greece coming on the scene and Alexander the Great. It tells us this kingdom is doing according to its will. Power is being transferred from one to another. When you get to verse 16, when power is being transferred from Syria to Rome, when Rome is now coming on the scene, it says does according to its will. So when you get to this verse, in verse 36, the king shall do according to his will, it's referring to another kingdom. You're seeing here, every time it says doing according to his will, we're coming up to a different power. Power is being transferred. And I just listed a few of the examples of how this principle is being used throughout Daniel. A lot of times the argument here is posed that this is spiritually the papacy, in verse 36. But we're at the time in the end when France goes in and takes the Pope captive. How can the papacy be doing according to its will at this time in February 1798 when the papacy's civil power was removed? The papacy's power is taken away. how can it be doing this? It conflicts with each other, and history, as we've been going down through the verses, the history has been matching up. But if you come to this point and say that somehow, I don't know what principle they use, but somehow this is now spiritually the papacy, it just doesn't add up because of what we just read about the papacy now having their civil power being taken away. So this kingdom, he does not regard the God of his fathers. Around this time, by 1798, in this area of time, the papacy does not disregard the papacy does not disregard the God that his father regarded. They are still worshiping the same way. No, Giselle, I wasn't sharing my screen. Um, as I was saying, oh yeah, they're still worshiping the same way. They have no new God. They have no new religion. However, this does. France got tired of the papacy and did away with religion altogether and became what is known as atheistic France. You can read about this in the whole chapter titled The French Revolution and the Great Controversy. And continuing on, it says, nor the desire of women. According to Deuteronomy 21:11, when a man has a desire of a woman, that is, it's talking about to marry her. Now, one thing, if you've read about the French Revolution, what's going on during this time, this kingdom is very much a homosexual kingdom. Um, they have no desire to marry women; they want to marry the same sex, and so on and so forth. Um, there are many cases where this is not true of Papal Rome. Even today, there is now an exception where um, the popes or priests can marry, right? And you see many different disturbing criminal cases of the papacy doing things to women. So this entity, the papacy, does desire women. France does not. And according to Greek Controversy, page 270, paragraph 1, no other nation defiled the institution of marriage more than that of France. So this is the evidence that we're bringing in to show how this is not the papacy and this is actually France. Um, it says, verse 38, but in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, a God whom his fathers knew not, shall he honor with gold and silver and with precious stones and pleasant things. So here a new God is coming on the scene. So at one time they are atheistic, then because the revolution became so bad, much bloodshed, um, because they did away with God. They realized that they need to bring a God back to um, bring back some kind of order to France because everything was just in an uproar. But it wasn't the God of heaven. They didn't go back to Catholicism, and they most certainly did not go to Protestantism. Right? Um, it was the goddess of reason, and you can see this in history. This was a god whom their fathers did not know. It's a totally new deity that they're coming up with. The papacy never did this. They never brought on a new god around 1798, whom their fathers knew not. They were worshipping the same at the time. But France, on the other hand, brings in the goddess of reason. their um, I guess their motto was "Vive la raison," which, you know, long live reason. This is what they used to say. So they are putting their money into her. The assemblies of France government makes this a law, and now they have said to have worshipped the goddess of reason. They were putting out in all their money to make this goddess, and it was just a whole thing, and it matches the verse perfectly. Verse 39, we're almost done with this chapter, friends. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. So, which serves to identify the application of this prophecy to France, perhaps as clearly as any other particular, is the statement made in the last clause of the verse, namely that they should divide the land for gain. Previous to the revolution, the land property of France was owned by a few landlords in immense estates. So these were really rich guys. They owned a lot of land. These estates were required by the law to remain undivided. so that no heirs, no creditors could partition them. But revolution knows no law, and in the anarchy that now reigned in France, as noted in the 11th chapter of Revelation, the titles of the nobility were abolished and their lands disposed of in small parcels for the benefit of the public. The government was in need of funds, and these large landed estates were confiscated and they were sold at auction in parcels to suit purchasers. Um, so France did just this. They divided the land for gain. After a lot of the aristocrats, of course, and the royals, they were executed. Now they have all this land. Before the revolution, they weren't allowed to divide it, but now they are dividing it for gain. People needed land, people needed money, and that's exactly what they did. Okay, verse 40. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him. So we were just talking about France. So at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him. We were just talking about France. And the king of the north shall come against him, again, France, like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. So now we need to figure out what this means. So after a long interval, right? After a long interval, the king of the south and the king of the north again appear on the stage of action. We have met with nothing to indicate that we are to look to any localities for these powers other than those which, shortly after the death of Alexander, constituted respectively the southern and the northern divisions of his empire. So nothing has changed here. Even though you've been going through France, um, this this huge mess basically that was happening in France, um, the king of the south and the king of the north come up again. Now, even though time has passed and the power has transferred to different kings, to different people, the locality stays the same. Whoever rules in the north is the one that ruled Alexander's original kingdom in the north. Whoever's ruling in the south is ruling the piece of land in the south from Alexander's kingdom, right? North, south, east, and west never changes, but the people that rule those areas do change, right? The king of the north, the king of the south are not subject to one specific person, but one specific locality, if that makes sense. So during this time, 1798, right? The king of the south at this time in Egypt, and then the king of the north was um, Syria, including Thrace and Asia Minor, right? That whole part of Lysimachus's realm, I guess you could say, if you remember as we went over it earlier. So Egypt is still, by common agreement, the king of the south, while the territory which at first constituted the king of the north has been for the past 400 years in this time frame fully included within the dominions of the Sultan of Turkey. Now, if you remember in our study of Revelation 9, Turkey, what was going on, the Mahometans, the Ottomans, they were starting to overtake this territory. So it was no longer overrun by the Byzantines. Turkey took it over. And now Turkey is the king of the north because he is ruling the northern division of Alexander's kingdom. So let's see. So to Egypt and Turkey, then in connection with the power, last consideration, we must look for a fulfillment of the verse before us. So if history has been going down, if we've been going down chronologically, seeing these power struggles, this transferring of power from one kingdom to the next, we need to find a fulfillment here to see if it matches. If it doesn't, then we need to look somewhere else. But we're going to see if history is still going to continue on in this in these final verses. Something you something that you also don't see is or something that's also brought up is that you don't see the king of the south or the king of the north mentioned from verse 25 until you get to verse 40. That's because you remember how these power struggles were going on. Rome had all this area, land, um, So if you control all of Alexander's empire, there's no need to refer to you as the king of the north or the king of the south because you've been ruling it all. But by now, in 1798, the papacy is removed out of the way, and the Ottoman Empire is now in control of a large portion of the world, and they're headquartered in the north, which was then Constantinople, but now after their conquest, it is powers change, but the locality doesn't. Again, the time of the end is mentioned in this verse, 1798. In July of 1798, France enters Egypt without permission, although France and Egypt are striving for good terms, but this invasion was not welcome. So, of course, the king of the south pushes at him, France, and the king of the north, which is now Turkey, also comes against France. And this plays out in two battles: the Battle of the Pyramids, in which France wins, and this was in July of 1798. And then there was the Battle of the Pyramids when the Ottomans of oh this was the yeah so the Battle of the Pyramids, the Ottomans lost against Napoleon. And then on September 11th of the same year, Turkey declares war against France, and a few months later come against France with ships and with chariots, just like the verse says. And this is called the Battle of the Nile. And just as the prophecy says, the Ottomans come out as the victors. They overflow and they pass over, as the scripture says. So here again, to a T, history is agreeing with prophecy, just like Miller's rules say, right? 41, he shall enter into the also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. This is referring to the literal Jerusalem as Daniel saw it in his day. Remember, he knew that he knew what the glorious land was. Like what we just established earlier, we looked through scripture to see what makes a land glorious, and it's wherever the feet of Christ are, as it says in Isaiah 60. And he was in Jerusalem. So when Egypt went into Jerusalem, Turkey followed behind them, and many countries were overthrown. And so what happened was when Egypt was trying to take the Ottoman territory of Syria from from Turkey, and Turkey came against him like a whirlwind. Egypt had entered into Jerusalem, and as a result, Turkey had also entered into the glorious land, obviously, to fight with them. And it said when this happened, certain territories were going to escape. So you have Edom, Moab, and the children of Ammon. These three territories were not in the path of Turkey, so they had escaped. And actually, up until the late 1800s and early 1900s, Turkey was actually paying tribute to these three lands. And this land of Edom, Moab, and the children of Ammon, this is a great portion of where Saudi Arabia and the Jordan is today. This is not talking about the Edomites, the Moabites, and the Ammonites, which we know have passed away by this time, but this is talking about those who are dwelling in the territory of Edom, of that was which was known as Moab, and that was known as Ammon. And today we know it as the territory of Jordan and Saudi Arabia. These two places were not in the path of Turkey when it was trying to go up against Egypt. Verse 42, he shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. Um, so let's see. Okay, I'm going to try to break this down because we're getting into some more history here. So around 1800, 1801, we're focusing on the conflict between France, Turkey, and the English. So Napoleon initially defeated the Turkish forces, and they were called back to France. The English, they were allied with the Turks. They launched a campaign to remove France from Egypt. A series of battles led to French defeats and retreats, culminating in the surrender of Cairo and Alexandria. These preliminaries were signed in London on October 1st, 1801. Um, it also notes that Egypt preferred French rule, viewing them as benefactors who brought improvement during their short stay. So some will say that the he shall stretch forth his hands also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. They might refer to it as France, but history does not agree with that because Egypt wanted to be under France. They didn't want to escape from France because they liked the benefits that they got from them, but they did not want they didn't want to be under the Turkish rule, but they did not escape because eventually Turkey got that land, and France was kicked out. Verse 43, but he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. So history gives us the following facts. When the French were driven out of Egypt and the Turks took possession, the Sultan permitted the Egyptians to reorganize their government as it was before the French invasion. He asked of the Egyptians neither soldiers, guns, nor fortifications, but left them to manage their own affairs independently, with the important exception of putting the nation under tribute to himself. In the Articles of Agreement between the Sultan of the Pasha and of Egypt, it was stipulated that the Egyptians should pay annually to the Turkish government a certain amount of gold and silver, and 600,000 measures of corn and 400,000 of barley. And this is an excerpt from Historic Echoes of the Voice of God by J. Couch. So Turkey does have power over the treasures of gold and of silver and the precious things of Egypt because they demanded tribute. Even though they allowed them to run their country the way that it used to, they didn't ask of anything. The only thing they asked for was tribute. And it says at the end of the verse, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps, because that is what bordered the country of Egypt, right? It literally was at his steps. Verse 44, but tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. So Turkey still occupies the original division of the north of Alexander's empire, and that is where Thrace, Asia Minor, and Bosphorus and the Hellespont area. Um, that's what we call the area of Constantinople today, or Istanbul. And tidings out of the east, this was Persia, and out of the north, north above Turkey, is Russia. They were making plans to come against Turkey. Russia was the greater aggressor, therefore, Russia became the main target of Turkey. And in 1853 to 1856, you have the Crimean War. Um, let me see here. Um, so here's something interesting. During the time that our pioneers were studying this message, in like 1825, this was what one doctor wrote about this verse. He says, this part of the prophecy is allowed to be yet unfulfilled. This was printed in 1825. The Crimean War was in 1853. In another portion of his comment, he says, if the Turkish power be understood, as in the preceding verses, it may mean that the Persians on the east and the Russians on the north will at some time greatly embarrass the Ottoman government. This was written in 1825, and very interestingly enough, Persia and Russia, Persia in the east, Russia in the north, came in and wanted to take Turkey. Their attitude and movements incited the Sultan to anger and revenge. Um, Russia, being the more aggressive party, was the object of attack. Turkey declared war on her powerful northern neighbor in 1853. The world looked on in amazement to see a government which had long been called the sick man of the East, a government whose army was disprepated and demoralized, whose treasuries were empty, whose rulers were vile and imbecile, and whose subjects were rebellious and threatening succession, rush with such impetuosity into the conflict. So, if you remember our study in Revelation 9, by 1840, the Ottomans have lost their power as an empire, right? This is happening in 1853. After all of that, the Ottomans are not as powerful as they once were. And that's why everyone during this time were so amazed at why Turkey was doing this, because this was a feeble government. They were surprised that they would engage in such a war with Russia. The prophecy said that they would go forth with great fury. And when they thus went forth in the war aforesaid, They were described in the profane vernacular of an American writer as fighting like devils. England and France, it is true, soon came to the help of Turkey, but she went forth in the manner described, and as is reported, gained important victories before receiving the assistance of these powers. So they did make some small victories going against these powers before they started getting help from these other um, governments. So now we reach the final verse. It says, "And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace, still talking about the king of the north here, and he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him." So here we have the final verse of Daniel 11, and this is where a lot of different interpretations come in. Um, oops, but I want to show this map here, and we're going to go through it and see. This event in this final verse, which proceeds right before the standing up of Michael or the close of probation, remains unfulfilled. What's interesting though is that it could more than well have come to the fulfillment towards the end of the 1800s when you take into consideration all the events going on at that time. You remember that um, they were starting to impose Sunday laws here in the United States. That power was rising up again. And then in the East, all of these things were happening with Turkey. Um, we find that this glorious holy mountain is Jerusalem, as we read in Daniel chapter 9, verse 16. And I'll post this in the side chat so you guys can read along as well. Daniel 9:16 says, "O Lord, according to all thy righteousness, I beseech thee, let thine anger and thy fury be turned away from thy city, Jerusalem, thy holy mountain, because for our sins and for the iniquities of our fathers, Jerusalem and thy people are become a reproach to all that are about us." The glorious holy mountain. We read in Daniel 9. We find out what this holy mountain is, and it's none other than Jerusalem. It's literally located directly in between the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. To plant here in this verse means to establish when you look up in the concordance. Whether to establish his palace means throne room when you do another word search, throne room or armory or treasury. This reminds us of when Constantine, when moving his headquarters to Constantinople, and established himself there. As I mentioned before, this could have more than well have come to fulfillment towards the end of the 1800s. And although it has not come to fulfillment yet because God's people were not yet ready, and in his mercy seems to have put a pause on this prophecy. But, friends, the interceding blood of Christ will not flow forever. All throughout history, the Muslims believe that the territory that Jerusalem is on belongs to them. They have been in check for many years, but recently their desire for this land has become more apparent. Some proof of this is since the late 600s, their second holiest mosque, known as the Dome of the Rock nowadays, is there, standing exactly where Solomon's temple was until the time it was destroyed by Rome in 70 AD. Also, its third holiest mosque in the world is also there, and it's called Al Aqsa, and it's not far from the Dome of the Rock. The Muslims believe that Christ is coming back, not that they believe that he's a savior, but they do believe that he is a prophet of Allah, and they believe that he's going to come back and that he's going to cleanse both of these mosques in Jerusalem and then kill the devil. That's their prophecies. And the Muslims want to be present when this Dome of the Rock, the mosque, and Al Aqsa mosques are when this supposedly takes place. They will go to Jerusalem to protect the mosques from the Jews. From 70 AD to 1798, the Jews were everywhere else in the world except Jerusalem. Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. In the 600s, the Muslims came to Jerusalem. In the late 600s, they built the Dome of the Rock, which is their second holiest mosque, and their first holiest mosque is in Mecca in the Middle East. And then their third mosque is also there in Jerusalem. The Muslims moved there in the 600s and had lived there ever since. In 1948, a part of this territory, also known as Palestine, was taken away from the Muslims and was given to the Jews in 1948. Um, and they're also now threatening to destroy these mosques in order to rebuild the Jewish temple. So you can see here that this can cause a holy war. Obviously, the Muslims are not there anymore. Obviously, that's what we know as Israel today. Um, and they're boldly declaring this even more now, since in 2017, 2018, Donald Trump declared Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel, which at the time Tel Aviv was the capital. But now the Jews are threatening to destroy these temples. And the events that have transpired recently with this war going on over there is not making things any better for them. Um, and now we're again going back to the chapter, or to this final verse. Um, if what we have read, all the history we went through, is correct, which I believe is correct because it harmonizes perfectly with scripture, what has to happen now is Turkey has to go in there, to the glorious holy mountain and plant his headquarters there, just like Constantinople did, or Constantine did when he moved his capital. Um, Basically, what has to happen, if it harmonizes with this verse, is that after Turkey removes from Constantinople to the Holy Mountain in Jerusalem and sets up his caliphate, not a democracy but a caliphate government, he will then come to his end. His civil power will be removed, as the civil power of the papacy at the time of the end was removed, and none will help him. None of the countries that helped Turkey before will come to the aid of Turkey. And while this is going on, Michael stands up. Probation on the world is closed. And if it can be if it can be proven from current event articles that Turkey is doing this as we speak, how should our attitude be towards this? This is a serious thing. One of the reasons why I wanted to um, share this message, this study with you all, is because a few weeks ago, Turkey is again threatening to invade Israel, and um, it's getting serious now. It's no like, what are the odds that Turkey is threatening to do this now? And we see all the other things that are going on in the world right now, you know, and it's all happening simultaneously. I want to read this quote from Stephen Haskell. It says, "God's eye is upon his people, and he never leaves himself without a witness in the world. No man knows when Turkey will take its departure from Europe." This was written in 1901. "But when that move is made, Earth's history will be short. Then it will be said, 'He that is unjust, let him be unjust still, and he that is righteous, let him be righteous still.' Today is the day of preparation. The fate of Babylon, Medo Persia, Greece, and Rome is recorded for the edification of the nations of today, and the lessons taught by all center in the events just before us. While the world watches Turkey, let the servants of God watch the movements of his high priest, whose ministry for sin is almost over." And like I said, this in conjunction with everything else going on in here in the US and in other parts of the world, we can see that the Lord is allowing everything to start back up again and pick up where we left off. Because like I said, toward the end of the 1800s, Turkey would have went in there and took Jerusalem. They had, every opportunity to do so. Again, you also have the Sunday laws that were happening during that time, and everyone believed that, like, in our church was like, yeah, this is it. But it stopped because God's people were not yet ready. God had to put a pause on this prophecy. But things like this are starting to pop up again, and we can see this stuff start coming up again. It's like God pressed play, and now things are starting up again. It's slowly, There's only one verse yet to be fulfilled, and that one verse is slowly coming into fruition. One thing to understand is that Daniel is not Revelation, and Revelation is not Daniel. A lot of times, there's you'll see different interpretations of this chapter. I mean, I went to a whole symposium in 2019 where different groups of people came together to bring their interpretations to the table. And I've seen almost every interpretation, and you have to do some sort of backflips, and you have to do many things to get a certain interpretation. Where somehow the verses from 35 to or 30 to 30 to 45 are spiritual, but it doesn't match because oops, it doesn't match because you have to take other measures to make it make sense. Whereas, which we have just studied and what I believe is true, all we did throughout this whole chapter, verse by verse, was just go down through the history to see it fulfilled and to see if it matched the verse. And we did. We didn't have to implement some new principle where somehow things turned spiritual and now we're coming up with a whole different interpretation. Because the main argument is that um, nowadays it's spiritually the papacy, um, and they come. There's just there's so much here where God has made it so plain for us to understand. And what happened was because this verse did not fulfill yet, we got impatient and we had to find some other way for it to be fulfilled. And what I think a lot of people get wrong is that they think that we're belittling the Sunday law, meaning like, oh, well, that can't be because what about the Sunday law? Where is that in this chapter? How is this going to happen? This chapter, this interpretation does not do away with the Sunday law. All of this is happening simultaneously. And like I said, Daniel is not Revelation, and Revelation is not Daniel. They complement each other. Not every single thing in Daniel is in Revelation, like word for word, and vice versa. Revelation is, just as the name implies, is a revelation of the things that were sealed in Daniel. We don't see the Ottoman Turks rise to power in Daniel 11. We just simply know by the time periods that it's there. But Revelation does. We understand this by Revelation 9. Remember, Revelation shows us how Turkey got into power, and then Daniel 11 shows us what this power is doing during that time. And it goes all the way down to the end verses of Daniel 11. And like I said, when I first heard about this news, I mean, it's been happening a lot. Erdogan, the president of Turkey, has been threatening. You can see this all over news articles. I think the first time I first studied this message was in 2017. So stuff was happening back then. And but when I first heard this a couple of weeks ago, I was afraid. I will admit, I was super scared. But what I realized after I've prayed with the Lord and thought about this is that fear is the beginning of wisdom. It's not a fear that paralyzes us, but it's a fear that motivates us to redeem the time because we don't have time to mess around. We don't have time to be worrying about our lives here on this earth. We're trying to prepare for the lives that happens in at the end of time, the heavenly life, right? Our heavenly lifetime. That is where the focus should be. And if God has to shake things up a little to try to get our attention, which is plainly here spoken of in Daniel 11, then so be it. Anything to wake us up. And it might be scary, but then that just shows us that we need to get our act together. At least to me, that has shown me that I need to get my act together. Because if I'm afraid after hearing this, that means that I've gotten too comfortable. And I'm just speaking for myself, friends. But this is my belief or my understanding this chapter. Like I said, there's a whole lot of interpretations, and you are more than welcome to explore those interpretations, because you have to bring everything together, like Miller's rules say, understand what the truth is. And that's what we've done here. We've gone through this verse by verse, broken it down, paired with different verses in scripture, and we come to this conclusion, or at least I have. And this is what I believe. I believe it's a very solid message, and that deserves further study and true understanding. Don't just leave here today and be like, oh, well, that must be it. No, study it for yourself even more. Pray about it. See, because if you don't understand it for yourself, like how Christ asks, how readest thou? You know, you need to read it and understand it for yourself for it to truly make sense and to truly convict. Because it's not about history, it's about how the word convicts you. I don't like going through prophecies and be like, oh wow, history, and that's it. But no, but how does this affect me spiritually? What do I get out of this spiritually? For me personally, like I just mentioned, it convicts me, get my act up together, share with others. I didn't want to share this message. Actually, this message should have been done a long time ago on this server, but I didn't because I was too scared because of the controversy surrounding it. But truly believe that it's something that needs to be shared no matter how much backlash you get from it. But I do hope that this was a blessing to you, some sort. You get something out of it, even if you don't agree with it. But don't want to keep you guys any longer. But thank you so much for um, sticking sticking with us here this evening. And let's go ahead and close up with a quick word of prayer. Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thank you, Father, for your word, for the wealth of knowledge that you give us. We realize by this that time is short, no matter what. And we pray that you may give us new hearts, Lord. Give us of your spirit. Are very serious things coming upon this world soon, Father, and even now. Pray, Lord, that you may open our eyes to see them, that you may help us to be prepared for the coming kingdom. Help us to prepare others. Be with each and every one of my brothers and sisters here, and let yourself be glorified in this, Lord. Thank you for your love and for your mercy. Thank you for all that you have done and all that you will do. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you everyone again for joining. I hope this wasn't too much. I don't I believe that there is a recording. We just recorded this on YouTube and I'll post it in the recordings channel. Um, and so you guys can go over it again if you need to. But yes, I hope you all have a good rest of your evening and we'll join back here in a couple of weeks. Continue our study on education.